Hey guys, tonight we're talking about a testosterone gel that promised to make aging men feel young again, but instead created an entire generation of infertile fathers and accidentally turned toddlers into miniature bodybuilders. AndroGel hit American pharmacies in 2000 as a revolutionary treatment for low testosterone, marketed as the safe alternative to painful injections. Within a decade, it generated over $1 billion annually while quietly sterilizing thousands of men who had no idea their morning routine was destroying their ability to have children. The same gel transferred to their kids through innocent hugs and bedtime stories, triggering premature puberty in children as young as 2 years old. Wives developed facial hair and deepened voices from casual contact with their husband's skin. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical executives celebrated record profits from a product that solved one minor problem by creating a cascade of catastrophic ones nobody saw coming. Dear viewers, our big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and with your support, we can achieve it. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about drugs. Subscribe so you don't miss them. We are sincerely grateful to everyone who helps us achieve this goal. Also, write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious to see people from all over the world brought together by a single story. And now, let's move on to today's story. To understand how one gel created this mess, you first need to understand how testosterone became medicine in the first place. The story begins in 1935 Amsterdam, where Dutch chemist Ernst Lequeur extracted a mysterious substance from bull testicles at the Organon Pharmaceutical Company. His team processed thousands of pounds of animal tissue, boiling and filtering until they isolated tiny amounts of crystalline hormone. Across Europe in Göttingen, German chemist Adolf Butenandt pursued the same goal with different methods, racing Lequeur to identify the exact molecular structure. Both men succeeded within months of each other, and both received credit for discovering testosterone, though Butenandt later won the Nobel Prize that Nazi Germany forced him to refuse. The hormone itself turned out to be elegantly simple, just 19 carbon atoms, 28 hydrogen atoms, and 2 oxygen atoms arranged in 4 connected rings. This small molecule controlled everything masculine in the human body, from muscle growth to facial hair to sperm production. Scientists immediately recognized its potential as medicine, but they faced a seemingly insurmountable problem. Swallowing testosterone accomplished nothing because stomach acid destroyed it within minutes. The hormone needed direct delivery into the bloodstream to have any effect whatsoever. Injections became the only option, and they were terrible. Early testosterone esters required thick needles driven deep into muscle tissue, often in the buttocks or thigh. Patients needed shots weekly or bi-weekly, sometimes for life. The pain was significant, infection risks were real, and most men hated the entire process. Doctors in the 1940s and 50s prescribed testosterone injections primarily for severe medical conditions like hypergonadism, where the testes produced almost no hormone naturally. Young men with underdeveloped genitals received the shots. So did boys whose puberty never started. Cancer patients who'd lost their testicles got injections to maintain basic masculine characteristics. The medical establishment kept testosterone locked in this narrow therapeutic box for decades. Doctors viewed it as a treatment for the genuinely ill, not something healthy men should ever need. That perspective dominated medicine through the 1960s and 70s, even as bodybuilders discovered testosterone's muscle-building properties and began using it illegally. The pharmaceutical industry largely ignored healthy men as potential customers because the delivery method was too unpleasant for mass markets. Everything changed when drug companies realized they could reformulate testosterone into something easier to take. Scientists experimented with patches in the 1980s, creating adhesive strips that delivered hormone through the skin. Testoderm hit the market in 1993, requiring men to stick patches on their scrotums daily. The location was deliberately chosen because scrotal skin absorbs chemicals more readily than other body areas. Men hated it anyway. The patches caused rashes, fell off during physical activity, and required shaving genital areas to maintain adhesion. Pharmaceutical chemists went back to their laboratories searching for better solutions. They knew transdermal delivery worked in principle, but patches were clearly the wrong format. The answer emerged from advances in gel technology developed for other medications. By mixing testosterone with alcohol-based carriers and penetration enhancers, scientists created a clear gel that dried quickly on skin while allowing hormone molecules to pass through the outer layer. The gel delivered steady testosterone levels throughout the day without the peaks and valleys of injections. Unimed Pharmaceuticals developed the formulation that became AndroGel, conducting clinical trials through the late 1990s. Their study showed the gel raised testosterone levels in hypergonadal men without serious side effects in the short term. Nobody looked carefully at long-term consequences because the trials only lasted months, not years. The company filed for FDA approval in 1999, submitting data that focused on effectiveness while downplaying potential risks. The FDA approved AndroGel in February 2000 for treating hypergonadism in adult males. The indication was deliberately narrow, restricted to men with specific medical conditions causing abnormally low testosterone. The approval letter specified that AndroGel should only be prescribed when blood tests confirmed low hormone levels from testicular, pituitary, or hypothalamic disease. This limitation would prove completely meaningless within a few years. Unimed partnered with Solvay Pharmaceuticals to market the product, and initial sales were modest. Doctors prescribed AndroGel cautiously to genuinely hypergonadal patients, following FDA guidelines. The gel came in small packets containing 50 or 100 milligrams of testosterone. Men applied it to shoulders and upper arms each morning, rubbing it in until the skin absorbed the clear liquid. Instructions warned users to wash hands after application and cover the area with clothing once dry. The medical mechanism seemed straightforward enough. Testosterone molecules penetrated the outer skin layer and entered the bloodstream gradually over 24 hours. Blood levels rose to normal ranges in hypergonadal men, alleviating symptoms like fatigue, decreased libido, and muscle weakness. The brain's hypothalamus detected adequate testosterone and stopped sending urgent signals to the pituitary gland. The pituitary in turn stopped bombarding the testicles with luteinizing hormone, the chemical messenger that normally commands sperm and testosterone production. This last part contained the hidden time bomb that nobody adequately warned patients about. When external testosterone convinced the brain that levels were sufficient, the entire reproductive system essentially shut down. The testicles stopped making their own testosterone and ceased sperm production almost entirely. For men with non-functioning testicles due to disease or injury, this didn't matter because their reproduction was already compromised. For men with healthy testicles who were simply on the lower end of normal testosterone ranges, it meant systematic sterilization. The pharmaceutical companies knew this biological fact. Medical textbooks explained the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis in detail. Endocrinologists understood that exogenous testosterone suppressed natural production. Yet somehow this crucial information failed to reach most patients and even many prescribing doctors. The consent forms mentioned possible fertility effects in vague medical language that few people understood or took seriously. Meanwhile, the gel's convenience attracted attention from doctors and patients frustrated with injections. Dermatologists noticed fewer skin reactions compared to patches. Primary care physicians appreciated the simplicity of prescribing a once-daily topical treatment. Men liked avoiding needles and the privacy of applying medication at home. Word spread through medical conferences and pharmaceutical sales representatives that AndroGel worked well and patients tolerated it better than alternatives. Solvay observed the positive reception and started planning a much larger marketing campaign. Company executives recognized they were sitting on potential blockbuster profits if they could expand beyond the small population of truly hypergonadal men. The key was redefining who needed testosterone therapy in the first place. Normal aging caused testosterone levels to decline gradually, dropping about 1% annually after age 30. This natural decrease rarely caused medical problems, but it created the perfect opportunity to medicalize normal physiology. The stage was set for transformation from niche medical treatment to mass-market lifestyle drug. AndroGel had FDA approval, decent safety data from short trials, and a convenient delivery method. All it needed was a massive marketing machine to convince millions of men that their normal aging process was actually a disease requiring pharmaceutical intervention. That machine was already being built, and it would reshape American medicine while creating health consequences nobody anticipated. The testosterone industry stood at a turning point in 2000. Behind it lay decades of limited use for serious medical conditions. Ahead lay an explosion of prescriptions that would quintuple in barely 10 years, driven by advertising campaigns that preyed on male insecurity and aging anxiety. The gel that made everything possible sat in pharmacy refrigerators, waiting to become one of the most profitable and controversial drugs of the new century. Solvay Pharmaceuticals launched the Low T campaign in 2002, and American medicine would never be the same. The marketing strategy was brutally simple. Convince middle-aged men that normal aging symptoms were actually a treatable disease. Television commercials showed formerly energetic men looking tired, ignoring their wives, struggling through workouts at the gym. A deep voiceover asked if low testosterone might be to blame, then suggested talking to a doctor about treatment options. The ads never mentioned that testosterone naturally declines with age in every mammal on Earth. Print advertisements appeared in men's magazines featuring questionnaires that medicalized everyday experiences. Feeling less energetic than at age 20? Check. Reduced interest in sex compared to your teenage years? Check. Difficulty maintaining muscle mass despite not exercising regularly? Check. The quizzes transformed normal middle-aged life into symptoms of hormone deficiency, requiring pharmaceutical correction. Solvay printed millions of copies and distributed them to doctors' offices across America. Pharmaceutical sales representatives became the ground troops in this campaign. These reps visited primary care doctors, internists, and urologists with carefully prepared pitches backed by glossy brochures. They brought free samples, sponsored lunches, and paid for doctors to attend educational seminars at expensive hotels. The message was consistent. Low T affects millions of American men who suffer unnecessarily because their testosterone hasn't been measured. A simple blood test could identify patients who would benefit from treatment. The sales pitch exploited a fundamental weakness in medical practice. Most doctors genuinely want to help patients feel better, and here was a solution for men complaining about fatigue, weight gain, and decreased libido. AndroGel offered an easy prescription that might address multiple complaints simultaneously. Primary care physicians particularly embraced testosterone therapy because they lacked specialized endocrinology training and trusted the pharmaceutical company's data and recommendations. Solvay redefined the threshold for low testosterone through clever manipulation of medical guidelines. Normal testosterone ranges varied wildly between laboratories, typically falling somewhere between 300 and 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. The company's marketing materials consistently emphasized the lower end of this range, suggesting that men below 400 or even 500 might benefit from treatment. This ignored the fact that testosterone levels fluctuate throughout the day and vary significantly between healthy individuals. The campaign created a feedback loop that accelerated prescriptions exponentially. Men saw commercials and asked their doctors about low T. Doctors received visits from sales reps emphasizing how many patients might have undiagnosed hormone deficiency. Pharmaceutical companies sponsored continuing medical education courses where speakers downplayed risks while highlighting benefits. Medical conferences featured presentations funded by testosterone manufacturers showing positive outcomes from treatment. Sales numbers reflected the strategy's devastating effectiveness. AndroGel revenue jumped from $18 million in 2001 to $150 million in 2004. Prescriptions for all testosterone products tripled between 2001 and 2006, reaching 1.5 million annually. These increases occurred despite no corresponding rise in actual hypergonadism diagnoses. The market was expanding because the definition of who needed treatment was expanding. We hope you have already subscribed to our channel, and if not, please do so right now. Our goal is to reach our first 1,000 subscribers. This is very important to us. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about drugs. Subscribe so you don't miss them, and we'll get back to the story. Abbott Laboratories acquired Solvay's pharmaceutical division in 2010, inheriting AndroGel just as the marketing machine hit maximum velocity. Abbott poured resources into expanding the low T campaign with celebrity endorsements and sponsorships. The company partnered with fitness websites, men's health publications, and sports programming to normalize testosterone therapy. Advertising budgets exceeded $100 million annually by 2011. Direct-to-consumer advertising reached saturation levels across all media platforms. Television commercials during football games showed men regaining vitality through testosterone treatment. Radio ads targeted morning commuters stuck in traffic, suggesting their exhaustion might stem from hormone deficiency. Online banner ads followed men across the internet, repeatedly asking if low T might explain their declining energy and libido. The messaging evolved to target increasingly younger demographics. Early campaigns focused on men over 50, the traditional age when testosterone decline becomes noticeable. By 2008, marketing materials featured men in their 40s and even late 30s. The industry recognized that younger patients meant longer treatment durations and higher lifetime profits. A 40-year-old starting testosterone therapy might continue for decades. Medical practices transformed to accommodate the testosterone boom. Low T centers opened in strip malls and medical buildings, offering quick testing and immediate prescriptions. These clinics operated on a business model that required high patient volume and generous prescribing to remain profitable. Men could walk in, get a blood test, and leave with an AndroGel prescription in under an hour. Follow-up appointments were minimal, monitoring was sporadic, and warnings about side effects were cursory at best. Online telemedicine companies joined the gold rush around 2010, offering even more convenient access. Men could submit blood test results through websites, have a brief video consultation, and receive prescriptions mailed directly to their homes. Some services advertised testosterone therapy as a performance enhancement for healthy men, explicitly marketing beyond FDA-approved indications. Regulatory oversight struggled to keep pace with these evolving distribution channels. Insurance coverage expanded to include testosterone therapy, removing financial barriers for many patients. When insurance companies balked at costs, pharmaceutical manufacturers offered copay assistance programs that reduced patient expenses while maintaining high reimbursement rates. The economics ensured doctors, pharmacies, and manufacturers all profited handsomely from every prescription written. AndroGel's market dominance reached its peak in 2011 with annual sales exceeding $1.2 billion. the gel commanded over 50% of the testosterone replacement therapy market. Abbott's stock price reflected investor enthusiasm for a blockbuster drug with apparently endless growth potential. Analysts projected continued expansion as baby boomers aged and younger men embraced optimization of their hormone levels. The medical community gradually split into believers and skeptics. Endocrinologists who specialized in hormone disorders grew increasingly alarmed at prescribing patterns. They published editorials questioning whether millions of men genuinely needed testosterone therapy, or whether pharmaceutical marketing had created an artificial epidemic. Their concerns were drowned out by the sheer momentum of the low-T movement and the financial incentives driving it forward. Professional medical societies issued guidelines attempting to establish appropriate prescribing criteria. The Endocrine Society published recommendations in 2010 emphasizing that testosterone therapy should be reserved for men with consistently low levels plus specific symptoms. These guidelines explicitly warned against treating men solely based on aging-related decline. Practically speaking, the recommendations had minimal impact because most testosterone was prescribed by non-specialists who either didn't know or didn't follow endocrinology society guidelines. Patient advocacy groups emerged, some genuinely grassroots and others quietly funded by pharmaceutical companies. These organizations promoted awareness of low T while lobbying for expanded insurance coverage and reduced regulatory restrictions. The line between patient advocacy and pharmaceutical marketing blurred beyond recognition. Websites that appeared to offer independent health information were actually sponsored content designed to drive AndroGel prescriptions. The FDA maintained its original approval language restricting AndroGel to hypergonadism from specific medical causes, but enforcement was practically non-existent. Off-label prescribing for age-related decline remained technically outside approved indications, yet it constituted the vast majority of actual use. The agency sent warning letters to manufacturers about misleading advertising, but took no action to meaningfully constrain the market's explosive growth. Media coverage generally celebrated testosterone therapy as medical progress. Men's health magazines ran enthusiastic features about hormone optimization. Mainstream news outlets published uncritical stories about the low-T epidemic and new treatment options. Investigative journalism that might have questioned the rapid medicalization of normal aging was largely absent. The pharmaceutical industry's advertising dollars exerted subtle pressure on media outlets to maintain positive coverage. By 2012, over 5 million American men had received testosterone prescriptions. The vast majority had no serious underlying medical condition, just blood test results at the lower end of normal ranges combined with vague symptoms like fatigue. Many were prescribed testosterone after a single blood test without proper diagnosis or consideration of alternative causes for their complaints. The medical system had transformed a legitimate treatment for rare endocrine disorders into a mass-market solution for male aging and lifestyle dissatisfaction. The prescribing surge generated massive profits distributed across the entire healthcare supply chain. Pharmaceutical manufacturers made billions. Doctors collected fees for office visits, consultations, and monitoring blood work. Laboratories processed millions of testosterone tests annually. Pharmacies filled endless prescriptions. Everyone benefited financially from the low-T gold rush, except the patients who would soon discover what they'd actually bought. Hidden beneath the marketing success and revenue growth, biological time bombs were already ticking in thousands of households. The gel that men rubbed on their skin each morning didn't just stay on their skin. AndroGel transferred to anyone who touched treated areas, adults and children alike. The same medication intended to restore masculine vitality in middle-aged men was silently dosing toddlers, wives and teenagers through casual physical contact. Nobody was measuring these unintended exposures or tracking their consequences, because the pharmaceutical companies had barely studied secondary transfer and certainly weren't advertising it. The marketing machine had successfully convinced millions that they needed testosterone therapy. What it had failed to explain was that this therapy would shut down their natural hormone production, potentially sterilize them, expose their families to powerful hormones without consent, and increase their risk of heart attacks and strokes. Those inconvenient truths were about to emerge in ways nobody anticipated. The first documented case of secondary testosterone exposure reached pediatric endocrinologists in Virginia during 2004. A 2-year-old boy arrived at the hospital with pubic hair, enlarged genitals, and aggressive behavior his parents couldn't explain. Blood tests revealed testosterone levels 40 times higher than normal for his age. The endocrinologist searched for tumors, genetic disorders, and accidental ingestion of medications. They found nothing until a physician asked what topical products the father used. AndroGel, every morning on shoulders and arms. The father lifted his son throughout the day, held him close during meals, carried him to bed at night. Testosterone molecules remained biologically active on skin surfaces for up to 6 hours after application. The alcohol carrier evaporated within minutes, leaving a hormone-rich residue that looked and felt like nothing. Casual touching transferred testosterone from treated skin to anyone making contact. Children absorbed the hormone through their thinner, more permeable skin at rates far exceeding adult absorption. A single hug delivered measurable doses. Daily contact created chronic exposure equivalent to deliberate hormone therapy. The Virginia boy's condition reversed after his father stopped using AndroGel, but the pediatric endocrinology community recognized they'd stumbled onto something disturbing. Similar cases began appearing in medical literature throughout 2005 and 2006. A 4-year-old girl in Texas developed clitoral enlargement and deepened voice. Twin 3-year-old boys in Florida both showed premature pubic hair and increased aggression. An 18-month-old in California had testosterone levels matching an adult male. Every investigation traced back to fathers, uncles, or grandfathers using testosterone gel. The pattern was unmistakable, yet somehow unexpected despite basic pharmacology principles. Hormones absorbed through skin didn't magically stay on that skin until washed off. They transferred to other surfaces, other bodies, through mechanisms as simple as a father's embrace or a child falling asleep on dad's bare shoulder during a summer afternoon. Pharmaceutical companies had conducted minimal secondary transfer studies before FDA approval. One small trial from 1999 measured testosterone transfer between male volunteers and female partners after intentional direct skin contact. The study found measurable transfer, but concluded it was unlikely to cause clinical effects. This conclusion would prove catastrophically wrong because the researchers hadn't studied children, hadn't measured cumulative exposure from daily contact, and hadn't followed subjects long enough to observe actual health impacts. Internal company documents later revealed executives knew secondary transfer occurred, but calculated that warning labels might hurt sales. Marketing departments argued that emphasizing transfer risks would make patients afraid to interact physically with their families. The decision was made to include minimal warnings in fine print, while advertising campaigns showed happy families interacting freely. Profit margins won over patient safety in calculations hidden from public view. The FDA issued its first warning about secondary testosterone exposure in September 2009, nearly a decade after AndroGel's approval. The agency required updated labeling warning patients to cover treated areas with clothing, wash hands thoroughly after application, and wash application sites before physical contact with others. The warning specifically mentioned risks to children and women, It arrived far too late for the thousands of children already exposed and did nothing to slow prescription growth. Most patients never read the updated warnings because doctors rarely discussed them during appointments. Pharmacies handed out information sheets that patients typically ignored. The warnings contradicted marketing materials showing active, engaged fathers playing with their children. Men who'd been told AndroGel would restore their vitality and improve their lives couldn't reconcile that message with warnings to avoid touching their families. Many simply didn't believe casual contact could cause problems. Secondary exposure wasn't limited to children. Wives and female partners experienced virilization from chronic contact with treated areas. Women developed increased body hair, particularly facial hair that required frequent removal. Voice deepening occurred in some cases, sometimes persisting after exposure ended. Acne flared in women who'd had clear skin for decades. Menstrual cycles became irregular as testosterone disrupted normal female hormone balance. The mechanism was straightforward endocrinology. Women's bodies produced tiny amounts of testosterone naturally, measured in nanograms rather than the hundreds of nanograms circulating in men. Even small additional amounts from skin contact could double or triple a woman's testosterone levels. Female physiology wasn't designed to handle these elevations, leading to masculinization that many women found distressing and embarrassing. Pet exposures added another dimension to the secondary transfer problem. Dogs and cats who slept with their owners, sat on laps, or cuddled against treated skin absorbed testosterone through their fur and skin. Veterinarians reported unusual cases of female dogs developing enlarged clitorises and male pattern aggression. Male cats showed increased territorial marking and fighting behavior. These animals couldn't report symptoms or understand why their bodies were changing. The alcohol-based gel formulation actually worsened secondary transfer compared to patches. Patches had covered treated areas with adhesive backing that reduced contact. Gel soaked into skin but also remained on the surface, invisible and potent. Men who applied gel to shoulders routinely wore t-shirts that rubbed against treated areas all day, effectively turning their clothing into hormone delivery systems. Anyone who touched those shirts, sat against them, or shared laundry absorbed residual testosterone. Laundry itself became a transfer vector nobody had anticipated. Testosterone molecules survived washing machine cycles and transferred to other clothing in the same load. Wives and children wore contaminated clothes without knowing it. Towels used after showering spread hormone residue across entire bodies. Bed sheets soaked up testosterone from skin contact during sleep, exposing partners through prolonged nightly contact spanning 8 hours or more. School nurses and daycare workers began noticing clusters of children with premature development in specific classes or centres. Investigation revealed that multiple children had fathers using testosterone gel. The pattern suggested that contaminated clothing might be spreading hormone residue, even through brief contact during drop-off and pickup. Some facilities implemented policies requiring fathers on testosterone therapy to thoroughly wash treated areas before entering buildings. Medical monitoring of patients on AndroGel rarely included questions about household members' health. Doctors focused on the patient's testosterone levels, symptoms, and satisfaction with treatment. Whether wives had developed facial hair or children showed signs of premature puberty simply wasn't part of standard follow-up protocols. The healthcare system had no mechanism to detect or track secondary exposure cases systematically. Dermatologists encountered women complaining of sudden acne, increased facial hair, and oily skin without obvious cause. Many of these women were partners of men using testosterone gel, but the connection often went unrecognized. Dermatologists prescribed treatments for the symptoms without identifying the source. Women underwent laser hair removal, took medications for acne, and felt confused about why their bodies had suddenly changed. Pediatricians saw children with behavioral changes, aggression, and premature development attributed to normal variation or other causes. Parents rarely volunteered information about household medication use during these appointments. Even when testosterone gel was mentioned, physicians unfamiliar with secondary transfer might dismiss it as irrelevant. Diagnostic delays meant children endured months of unnecessary testing, while continuous hormone exposure continued. The true scale of secondary exposure remained unknown because no centralized reporting system existed. Individual case reports in medical journals represented only the most obvious and severe instances. Mild exposures causing subtle effects went completely undetected. Researchers estimated that for every documented case of childhood virilization from testosterone gel, dozens or hundreds more children experienced exposure that produced no immediately recognizable symptoms but might affect long-term development. Some exposed children showed advanced bone age on X-rays, meaning their skeletons had matured faster than their chronological age warranted. This acceleration could lead to shorter adult height, because growth plates close prematurely. Parents noticed their kids growing faster than expected initially, only to have growth stop earlier than normal. The temporary boost in development extracted a permanent cost in final height. Psychological effects in exposed children proved difficult to quantify, but appeared significant in some cases. Increased aggression, irritability, and emotional volatility matched known effects of elevated testosterone. Parents described children becoming difficult to manage, getting into fights at school, and experiencing mood swings that seemed out of character. Whether these behavioral changes resolved completely after exposure ended remained unclear. Female children faced unique risks from testosterone exposure. The hormone could affect developing reproductive systems in ways that might not become apparent until puberty or later. Animal studies suggested prenatal and early childhood androgen exposure could alter ovarian function, though human data remained limited. Young girls exposed to their father's testosterone gel became unknowing participants in an experiment nobody had designed or approved. The FDA's 2009 warning produced minimal change in prescribing patterns or patient behavior. AndroGel sales continued growing without interruption. Pharmaceutical companies never launched public awareness campaigns about secondary transfer, despite regulatory requirements to update labeling. The profit machine rolled forward while children continued absorbing hormone doses their bodies couldn't handle. By 2013, medical literature contained dozens of documented secondary exposure cases, yet public awareness remained almost non-existent. Media coverage of testosterone therapy focused on benefits and lifestyle improvements, not on children developing premature puberty from their father's medication. The marketing narrative about restored masculinity and vitality completely overshadowed the reality that this medication was contaminating entire households. Lawsuit depositions would later reveal that Solvay and Abbott conducted internal studies confirming significant secondary transfer. Company scientists knew children could reach clinical testosterone levels from normal family contact with treated adults. This information stayed buried in corporate archives while marketing departments emphasized the safety and convenience of gel formulation. The companies chose to risk children's health rather than acknowledge a problem that might reduce sales. The secondary transfer disaster demonstrated how thoroughly profit incentives had corrupted medication safety. A predictable pharmacological consequence of topical hormone application had been minimized, dismissed, and actively concealed to protect market share. Thousands of children absorbed powerful hormones without anyone's knowledge or consent, all because honest warnings might have hurt quarterly earnings. The invisible transfer of testosterone from fathers to families represented pharmaceutical negligence on a massive scale. Yet it was only one dimension of the AndroGel catastrophe about to fully emerge. The reproductive endocrinology clinic in Boston received an unusual consultation request in 2008. A 34-year-old man and his wife had been trying to conceive for 18 months without success. The wife's fertility workup showed normal ovulation, clear fallopian tubes, and healthy hormone levels. The husband's semen analysis revealed the problem: 0 sperm, complete azoospermia. His testicles produced no sperm cells whatsoever despite appearing normal on physical examination. The reproductive specialist reviewed the patient's medical history and found AndroGel prescribed 3 years earlier for fatigue and low libido. His testosterone levels before treatment had measured 320 nanograms per deciliter, technically within normal range but on the lower end. A primary care physician had prescribed the gel after a single blood test. Nobody had warned the patient that external testosterone would shut down his natural production and destroy his fertility. The hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis functions like a thermostat controlling reproductive hormones. The hypothalamus at the brain's base constantly measures circulating testosterone levels. When levels drop too low, the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone that travels to the nearby pituitary gland. The pituitary responds by secreting luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone into the bloodstream. These hormones reach the testicles and command them to produce testosterone and sperm. External testosterone short-circuits this entire system. The hypothalamus detects adequate testosterone from the gel and stops sending distress signals. Without gonadotropin-releasing hormone, the pituitary goes quiet. Without pituitary hormones, the testicles receive no instructions to produce anything. Sperm production ceases within weeks. Natural testosterone synthesis halts. The testicles shrink as the cellular machinery for hormone and sperm production atrophies from disuse. This mechanism was established endocrinology, taught in medical schools and explained in textbooks. Yet somehow thousands of prescribing doctors either didn't know or didn't adequately communicate this information to patients. Men in their 30s and 40s with healthy reproductive systems received testosterone therapy without understanding they were chemically castrating themselves. The fertility consequences arrived as complete surprises years later when couples attempted conception. The Boston case was far from unique. Fertility clinics across America began seeing similar patients in the late 2000s. Previously fertile men who'd fathered children before starting testosterone therapy discovered they'd become sterile. Others who'd never tried to conceive learned about their azoospermia only when starting families. Many had continued AndroGel for years, convinced the gel was helping them feel better while it systematically destroyed their reproductive capacity. Stopping testosterone therapy didn't guarantee fertility recovery. Some men regained sperm production within months of discontinuing treatment. Others required a year or longer for the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis to reboot. A significant percentage never fully recovered, remaining oligospermic with sperm counts too low for natural conception, or completely azoospermic permanently. Their testicles had been offline so long that the sperm-producing cells had died or become irreversibly damaged. The variability in recovery created agonizing uncertainty for couples desperate to conceive. Doctors couldn't predict which patients would recover fertility or how long recovery might take. Some men showed improving sperm counts that plateaued below functional levels. Others had encouraging initial recovery followed by persistent azoospermia. Reproductive endocrinologists found themselves treating iatrogenic infertility caused by unnecessary hormone therapy prescribed for vague symptoms like feeling tired. Medical interventions to restore fertility added insult to injury. Human chorionic gonadotropin injections could stimulate testicles directly, bypassing the suppressed pituitary gland. These shots required months of treatment, cost thousands of dollars, and didn't always work. Clomiphene citrate, a fertility drug normally used in women, could sometimes restart the male reproductive axis. Success rates were unpredictable, leaving couples in limbo for extended periods. In vitro fertilization became necessary for many couples who couldn't wait years for potential natural fertility recovery. IVF costs range from $15,000 to $30,000 per cycle, with no guarantee of success. Some men had sperm counts too low even for standard IVF, requiring intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where individual sperm cells were injected directly into eggs. The most severe cases needed testicular sperm extraction, a surgical procedure harvesting sperm directly from testicular tissue. Couples spent their savings on fertility treatments necessitated by a gel prescribed for minor complaints. Men who'd started AndroGel because they felt slightly less energetic than in their 20s now faced the possibility of never fathering biological children. The emotional devastation compounded financial stress. Marriages crumbled under the weight of infertility, medical procedures, and the knowledge that sterilization had been preventable and unnecessary. Informed consent had been virtually non-existent. Doctors prescribing AndroGel typically mentioned fertility risks in passing, if they mentioned them at all. Consent forms used technical language about potential effects on spermatogenesis that meant nothing to patients. Nobody explained in plain terms that testosterone therapy would make them infertile, possibly permanently. Men signed forms without understanding they were consenting to chemical castration. The fertility disaster revealed how thoroughly the low-T marketing campaign had obscured medical reality. Advertisements showed vigorous men restored to youthful vitality, implicitly suggesting testosterone therapy enhanced masculinity and virility. The actual effect was the opposite: systematic destruction of the biological foundation of male reproduction. A medication marketed to make men feel more masculine was literally unmanning them in the most fundamental way possible. Younger men suffered disproportionately because aggressive marketing had expanded the target demographic downward. Men in their late 20s and early 30s received AndroGel prescriptions despite being years away from any age-related testosterone decline. These patients had decades of potential fertility ahead when they started treatment. Many hadn't yet considered having children, assuming fertility would be available whenever they decided to start families. The tragedy deepened when men discovered their infertility years after starting treatment. A 30-year-old who began AndroGel might not attempt conception until 35 or later. By then he'd been on testosterone therapy for 5 years, his testicles thoroughly suppressed and possibly damaged beyond recovery. The delay between starting treatment and recognizing consequences meant preventable harm had already occurred. Some patients had explicitly asked about fertility before starting testosterone therapy and been reassured the effects were reversible. Doctors who didn't fully understand reproductive endocrinology gave dangerously incorrect information. Other physicians dismissed fertility concerns, assuming patients could simply stop the gel if they wanted to conceive. This casual approach ignored the reality that recovery might take years or never happen at all. Medical malpractice cases began emerging around 2012 as infertile men sued prescribing physicians for failure to obtain proper informed consent. Depositions revealed shocking gaps in doctor knowledge about testosterone's effects on fertility. Some physicians genuinely didn't understand the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, despite prescribing a medication that disrupted it. Others knew, but failed to adequately communicate risks because discussing infertility during appointments was uncomfortable or time-consuming. The low-T clinics operating on high-volume business models had the worst track records for informed consent. These facilities pushed testosterone therapy as a lifestyle enhancement, with minimal discussion of serious risks. Patients received prescriptions after 50-minute appointments without thorough evaluation or counseling. The profit-driven model incentivized prescribing rather than careful patient selection and education. Online telemedicine services compounded the informed consent problem by removing face-to-face physician interaction entirely. Men uploaded blood test results, had brief video consultations, and received prescriptions through the mail. Discussing complex topics like fertility suppression and permanent reproductive damage was nearly impossible in this format. Patients clicked through electronic consent forms without comprehending what they acknowledged. Reproductive medicine specialists grew increasingly frustrated watching primary care doctors and low-T clinics destroy their patients' fertility. Professional societies publish position statements emphasizing that testosterone therapy causes infertility and should only be prescribed to men who've completed their families or don't want children. These recommendations had minimal impact because most testosterone was prescribed outside specialty practices by physicians who didn't follow endocrinology society guidelines. The pharmaceutical companies maintained that adequate warnings appeared in prescribing information and patient materials. Legal teams pointed to technical language in package inserts about effects on spermatogenesis as proof of proper disclosure. This defense ignored the reality that almost nobody reads package inserts, and technical medical terminology doesn't constitute meaningful informed consent for lay patients. Some infertile men discovered they'd been prescribed testosterone despite blood tests showing normal levels that didn't require any treatment. Their medical records documented testosterone concentrations of 400 or 500 nanograms per deciliter before starting AndroGel, well within the 300-1000 range considered normal. These men had been sterilized to treat a condition they never had, victims of overprescribing driven by pharmaceutical marketing rather than medical necessity. The psychological impact of medication-induced infertility proved profound and long-lasting. Men experienced depression, anxiety, and feelings of inadequacy related to their inability to reproduce. Some described feeling betrayed by a medical system that had sterilized them while claiming to improve their health. Others struggled with guilt about putting their partners through expensive, invasive fertility treatments. Relationships deteriorated as couples blamed each other, or the patient blamed himself for trusting doctors who'd failed him. Support groups formed online where men shared experiences of AndroGel-induced infertility. These forums revealed the scale of the problem with thousands of members, comparing stories of unsuccessful fertility recovery and expensive IVF cycles. The shared experiences contradicted pharmaceutical company claims that fertility effects were minor and easily reversible. Many men reported years of persistent azoospermia, despite stopping testosterone and trying various recovery protocols. Research studies quantifying the fertility impact began appearing in medical literature around 2015. One analysis found that nearly 90% of men on testosterone therapy developed oligospermia or azoospermia within months. Recovery rates varied dramatically, with some studies showing 50% recovered adequate sperm counts within 2 years, while others found much lower recovery rates. The inconsistent data reflected how little systematic research had been done before millions of men started treatment. Animal studies provided disturbing evidence about permanent damage from prolonged testosterone exposure. Rats given external testosterone for extended periods showed persistent reductions in sperm production even after treatment stopped. Testicular cells responsible for sperm production underwent apoptosis, essentially programmed cell death, during sustained hormonal suppression. If human testicles behave similarly, men on long-term testosterone therapy might suffer irreversible reproductive damage. The fertility catastrophe represented medical negligence on an unprecedented scale. Millions of men had received unnecessary hormone therapy that destroyed their reproductive capacity, often without adequate warning or consent. Pharmaceutical companies had marketed testosterone as a solution for aging and low energy, while downplaying the reality that it functioned as effective male contraception with potentially permanent effects. The families these men never had represented the invisible victims of the low T epidemic. By 2016, reproductive endocrinologists estimated tens of thousands of American men had experienced significant infertility from testosterone therapy. The actual number was likely far higher because many affected men hadn't yet attempted conception and didn't know they were infertile. Others might have blamed their wives for fertility problems without investigating their own sperm counts. The true scope of testosterone-induced infertility would take decades to fully emerge as younger cohorts of users reached the age when they tried to start families. The systematic sterilization of healthy men for profit represented perhaps the darkest aspect of the AndroGel story. Children were one thing, cardiovascular risks another, but fertility destruction struck at the core of human reproduction. A drug prescribed casually for minor complaints had robbed thousands of men of the fundamental ability to father children, all while pharmaceutical executives celebrated billion-dollar revenues and physicians collected fees for appointments that destroyed their patients' futures. The first cardiovascular signal emerged from a Veterans Administration database in 2010. Researchers analyzing medical records noticed older men prescribed testosterone therapy had higher rates of heart attacks and strokes compared to similar veterans not receiving hormones. The initial study examined 8,300 men over age 65, finding a 30% increase in cardiovascular events within 3 years of starting treatment. Journal reviewers questioned the methodology. Pharmaceutical companies dismissed the findings as statistical noise, and prescriptions continued accelerating. A larger bombshell dropped in November 2013 when the Journal of the American Medical Association published results from a study of 8,000 men undergoing cardiac catheterization. Patients prescribed testosterone after their procedures experienced 25% more heart attacks, strokes, and deaths compared to those who didn't receive hormones. The elevated risk appeared within months, not years. Men over 65 showed even worse outcomes, with risks jumping nearly 50%. The study's lead investigator received death threats from testosterone therapy advocates who accused him of destroying men's quality of life with flawed research. Online forums dedicated to hormone optimization attacked the methodology, questioned the researchers' motives, and claimed pharmaceutical companies opposed to testosterone had funded the study. The backlash revealed how entrenched testosterone culture had become among users who viewed the hormone as essential to their well-being and masculinity. Another study from November 2013 analyzed insurance claims data from 55,000 men prescribed testosterone. Heart attack rates doubled in men over 65 during the first 90 days of treatment. Younger men with pre-existing heart disease showed a 2 to 3-fold increase in cardiac events. The pattern was unmistakable. Testosterone therapy increased cardiovascular risk across multiple patient populations, studied through different methodologies. The mechanism behind increased heart attacks involved multiple pathways. Testosterone raised red blood cell production through stimulation of bone marrow, increasing hematocrit and blood viscosity. Thicker blood flowed less easily through vessels and clotted more readily. Men on testosterone therapy developed erythrocytosis that made their blood sludge-like, straining hearts and increasing stroke risk from clots forming in thickened circulation. Testosterone also affected cholesterol metabolism in harmful ways. The hormone decreased HDL cholesterol, the protective type that removes plaques from arteries. Lower HDL meant reduced cardiovascular protection, precisely when other testosterone effects were increasing cardiac workload. Some studies showed testosterone raised LDL cholesterol, though findings were inconsistent. Regardless of cholesterol effects, the hormone clearly shifted metabolic balance toward increased cardiovascular risk. Sleep apnea worsened dramatically in men using testosterone, particularly those already prone to breathing disruptions during sleep. The hormone increased upper airway collapse and reduced respiratory drive. Severe sleep apnea caused repeated oxygen deprivation throughout the night, straining hearts and raising blood pressure. Many men started testosterone therapy without sleep apnea screening, then developed severe breathing problems that went undiagnosed while their cardiovascular systems deteriorated. Blood pressure elevations occurred frequently in testosterone users. The hormone promoted sodium retention and increased sympathetic nervous system activity, both driving hypertension. Men who'd had well-controlled blood pressure before treatment developed resistant hypertension, requiring multiple medications. Others had uncontrolled pressure spikes that damaged blood vessels and increased heart attack risk without producing obvious symptoms until cardiovascular events occurred. The FDA announced a safety investigation in January 2014, citing the accumulating evidence of cardiovascular harm. The agency warned that testosterone products carried possible increased risk of heart attack and stroke, particularly in older men and those with existing heart disease. This announcement should have triggered widespread re-evaluation of testosterone prescribing. Instead, the industry mobilized to protect market share. Pharmaceutical companies funded their own studies designed to show cardiovascular safety. These trials used carefully selected younger, healthier patients, unlikely to experience heart attacks regardless of treatment. Follow-up periods were kept short to minimize event detection. Statistical analyses emphasize surrogate markers like cholesterol levels rather than actual cardiovascular events. Industry-sponsored research consistently found no safety concerns, while independent studies showed clear harm. Professional medical societies divided over testosterone's cardiovascular risks. The Endocrine Society expressed serious concerns and recommended caution in prescribing, particularly to older men. The American Urological Association downplayed risks and supported continued widespread use. These contradictory positions reflected different specialty perspectives and possibly different degrees of pharmaceutical industry influence through research funding and conference sponsorships. Cardiologists treating heart attack patients began asking about testosterone use, and discovering many victims had been prescribed AndroGel or similar products. A 62-year-old man suffered a massive heart attack 6 months after starting testosterone for fatigue. His cardiac catheterization revealed multiple severely blocked arteries that hadn't been symptomatic before treatment. A 57-year-old developed unstable angina requiring emergency bypass surgery within a year of beginning testosterone therapy for low T. These individual cases accumulated into a disturbing pattern. Previously healthy men developed acute cardiovascular problems shortly after starting hormones. Others with stable coronary disease experienced sudden deterioration coinciding with testosterone initiation. Emergency room physicians saw stroke patients whose only new medication was testosterone gel, started weeks or months earlier, for vague complaints about energy and mood. The cardiovascular risk appeared dose-dependent in some analyses. Men prescribed higher testosterone doses showed greater increases in heart attacks and strokes. This finding suggested a direct causal relationship rather than coincidence or confounding factors. The pharmaceutical companies had marketed higher doses as potentially more effective for symptom relief, without studying whether those doses also caused proportionally more harm. Testosterone's effects on arterial plaques proved particularly dangerous. The hormone promoted plaque instability, making atherosclerotic deposits more likely to rupture and trigger clots. A man might have stable coronary artery disease for years, then start testosterone therapy and experience acute plaque rupture causing massive heart attack. The testosterone hadn't created the underlying disease, but had transformed stable disease into deadly acute events. Some patients developed arrhythmias after starting testosterone therapy. Atrial fibrillation, a dangerous irregular heart rhythm, occurred more frequently in testosterone users. This arrhythmia increased stroke risk through formation of clots in the poorly contracting atria. Men without previous rhythm problems suddenly needed blood thinners and rhythm control medications to manage testosterone-induced cardiac electrical instability. The FDA convened an advisory committee meeting in September 2014 to evaluate testosterone's cardiovascular safety. Outside medical experts reviewed the available evidence and heard testimony from researchers, pharmaceutical representatives, and patients. The committee recommended strengthened warnings and labeling changes emphasizing cardiovascular risks. The FDA accepted these recommendations but took months to implement meaningful regulatory action. Updated labeling finally appeared in March 2015, requiring testosterone products to carry warnings about possible increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. The new label specifically cautioned against using testosterone for age-related low testosterone in men without pathological hypergonadism. This represented the FDA's strongest language to date against the low T epidemic driving most prescriptions. The labeling changes had minimal impact on prescribing patterns. Doctors who'd been writing AndroGel prescriptions for years continued doing so with little modification to their practices. Patients already on testosterone therapy rarely stopped treatment despite new warnings. The pharmaceutical industry continued marketing aggressively, now emphasizing that regulatory warnings were based on flawed studies and that testosterone's benefits outweighed theoretical risks. Meanwhile, cardiovascular events kept occurring. A 51-year-old marathon runner developed a heart attack while training, 8 months after his doctor prescribed testosterone for slightly low morning levels. An active 60-year-old suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed, less than a year into testosterone treatment for fatigue attributed to low T. These men had been healthy before seeking medical care for minor complaints that testosterone therapy transformed into life-threatening cardiovascular crises. Emergency department data from 2014-2016 showed testosterone mentioned increasingly often in heart attack and stroke cases. Paramedics and ER physicians began including hormone therapy in medication histories they routinely collected. The pattern became obvious to frontline practitioners, even as pharmaceutical companies and some specialists continued denying clear cardiovascular risks. Autopsy studies provided grim confirmation of testosterone's lethal potential. Pathologists examining hearts from sudden cardiac death victims found testosterone users had more severe coronary atherosclerosis than expected for their ages. Microscopic analysis revealed increased inflammatory cells in arterial walls and characteristics of unstable plaques prone to rupture. These pathological findings offered biological mechanisms explaining the epidemiological associations between testosterone therapy and cardiovascular mortality. Insurance companies began restricting testosterone coverage in response to cardiovascular evidence. Prior authorization requirements appeared, demanding documentation of severe hypergonadism before approving prescriptions. Some insurers required cardiac risk assessment and mitigation strategies before authorizing hormone therapy for men with heart disease. These administrative barriers aimed to reduce inappropriate prescribing but frustrated patients who'd come to depend on testosterone and doctors who profited from prescribing it. The cardiovascular catastrophe revealed how thoroughly the pharmaceutical industry had manipulated medical practice. Testosterone therapy had been marketed to millions of men despite inadequate long-term safety data, particularly regarding heart attack and stroke risks. Short-term clinical trials designed to gain FDA approval had missed delayed cardiovascular effects that only emerged after years of population-wide exposure. By the time clear signals appeared, massive numbers of men had already been exposed to increased risks. Class action lawsuits consolidated in federal court by 2016, with over 4,000 plaintiffs claiming testosterone therapy had caused heart attacks, strokes, blood clots, or deaths. The litigation would reveal internal company documents showing executives knew about cardiovascular concerns but chose to prioritize profits over patient safety. Email exchanges discussed downplaying risks in marketing materials and funding research designed to generate favorable safety data. One particularly damning document showed pharmaceutical executives calculating that even if testosterone increased heart attacks by 30%, the market was large enough and profitable enough to justify continued aggressive promotion. The company's risk-benefit analysis focused entirely on corporate finances rather than patient health. Dead and disabled patients represented acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of blockbuster revenues. The human cost of testosterone's cardiovascular effects would never be fully quantified. Thousands of men suffered heart attacks and strokes that might not have occurred without hormone therapy. Many died suddenly, never knowing testosterone had contributed to their deaths. Others survived with permanent disabilities, their health destroyed by medication prescribed for trivial complaints like feeling less energetic than decades earlier. The cardiovascular disaster intersected with the fertility catastrophe and secondary exposure problems to create a comprehensive portrait of pharmaceutical negligence. A drug with serious risks across multiple organ systems had been marketed as a lifestyle enhancement and prescribed to millions of men who didn't need it. The cardiovascular deaths represented the most visible harm, but the full spectrum of testosterone-induced damage extended far beyond what heart attack statistics captured. By 2017, the medical community had overwhelming evidence that widespread testosterone prescribing had been a massive public health mistake. Yet AndroGel remained on pharmacy shelves, low-T clinics continued operating, and millions of men continued their daily hormone applications. The machine built to generate pharmaceutical profits proved almost impossible to stop, even after its lethal consequences became undeniable. The first testosterone lawsuit filed in federal court came from a Chicago man who'd suffered a massive heart attack at age 52, 3 years after starting AndroGel for low energy. His attorneys obtained medical records showing normal testosterone levels before treatment and no cardiac risk factors beyond mild hypertension. The heart attack had left him with permanent damage, unable to work and dependent on multiple medications. His case became a template for thousands that followed. By January 2014, the federal court system faced enough testosterone litigation to warrant consolidation. Judge Matthew Kennelly of the Northern District of Illinois took control of multi-district litigation, encompassing cases against AbbVie, Endo Pharmaceuticals, and other manufacturers. The initial consolidation included 300 cases. That number would explode to over 6,000 within 3 years, as attorneys across America identified clients who'd suffered cardiovascular events while using testosterone products. Discovery and mass tort litigation functions like excavating a crime scene buried in corporate documents. Plaintiff attorneys issued subpoenas demanding internal company emails, meeting minutes, research reports, and marketing materials spanning decades. AbbVie fought aggressively to prevent disclosure, claiming proprietary business information and attorney-client privilege. Judges ordered production anyway, and the documents that emerged painted a devastating picture of corporate knowledge and deliberate concealment. Internal emails from 2006 showed marketing executives discussing how to downplay cardiovascular risks in promotional materials. One message explicitly stated that emphasizing safety concerns would hurt sales and suggested focusing advertising on vitality and energy instead. Another email chain revealed debate about whether to fund long-term cardiovascular outcome studies, with executives deciding against such research because negative results would be commercially problematic. Company scientists had conducted preliminary analyses of adverse event reports as early as 2008, finding elevated cardiovascular event rates among AndroGel users compared to the general population. These findings were presented internally but never published or shared with the FDA. Instead, the safety department recommended enhanced monitoring and additional studies. Management rejected the recommendations as unnecessary and potentially harmful to the product's market position. Depositions of former employees revealed a corporate culture where sales targets trumped safety concerns. Sales representatives received bonuses based on prescription volume with no consideration for appropriate patient selection. Marketing budgets dwarfed research spending on safety studies. Executives received compensation packages tied directly to AndroGel revenue, creating perverse incentives to maximize prescribing regardless of medical appropriateness or patient harm. One particularly damaging deposition came from a former medical director who'd left AbbVie in 2012 after clashing with executives over cardiovascular risks. He testified that he'd repeatedly warned leadership about accumulating safety signals and recommended restricting marketing to genuinely hypergonadal men. His superiors had rejected these recommendations and eventually forced him out for being too conservative and not sufficiently committed to the brand's growth. The physician had documented his concerns in internal memos that became Exhibit A in dozens of lawsuits. These memos showed unambiguous warnings about heart attack risks delivered to senior management years before the FDA investigation. Company lawyers had reviewed the concerns and advised executives they could continue current marketing practices without additional disclosures. Corporate leadership had chosen profits over patient safety with full knowledge of potential consequences. Discovery revealed sophisticated marketing research identifying target demographics most susceptible to low-T messaging. Focus groups had tested various advertising approaches to find which generated the most prescription requests. The research showed that emphasizing declining masculinity and sexual performance resonated powerfully with middle-aged men. Marketing campaigns were then tailored to exploit these insecurities while minimizing discussion of serious risks. Sales training materials instructed representatives to position AndroGel as a lifestyle enhancement rather than treatment for serious disease. Representatives learned techniques for handling physician objections about off-label use and cardiovascular concerns. Mock conversations prepared reps to redirect doctors away from safety discussions and toward testimonials about patient satisfaction and quality of life improvements. The company had paid key opinion leaders, prominent physicians who spoke at conferences and published papers supporting testosterone therapy. These doctors received consulting fees, speaking honoraria, and research grants totaling millions of dollars. Many had undisclosed financial conflicts when they published articles downplaying cardiovascular risks or promoting aggressive testosterone prescribing. Their opinions carried weight in medical communities, shaping practice patterns while secretly serving pharmaceutical company interests. Ghostwriting arrangements came to light showing that pharmaceutical company employees had drafted medical journal articles that appeared under physicians' names. These publications presented company-favorable interpretations of study data without disclosing corporate authorship. Peer reviewers and readers had no way of knowing they were reading pharmaceutical marketing disguised as independent medical research. One systematic review article published in a respected urology journal in 2012 had concluded testosterone therapy was safe and effective for age-related low testosterone. Discovery documents showed AbbVie medical writers had drafted the entire manuscript, selecting studies to include and exclude, writing all text, and recruiting a prominent urologist to be listed as senior author. The urologist had received $40,000 in consulting fees that year and rubber-stamped the company-written article without substantial modification. These publications had real consequences because doctors cited them when making prescribing decisions. Physicians reading ghost-written articles believed they were getting objective medical evidence when they were actually consuming pharmaceutical company propaganda. The corrupted medical literature had facilitated the low-T epidemic by providing false scientific support for aggressive prescribing. Trial testimony from patients revealed the inadequacy of informed consent across thousands of cases. Men described 5-minute appointments where doctors presented testosterone as a simple solution for fatigue, with minimal discussion of risks. Many couldn't recall receiving any warnings about cardiovascular problems. Others remembered vague mentions of possible side effects, but nothing suggesting risks of heart attack, stroke, or death. A 56-year-old plaintiff testified he'd been prescribed AndroGel by his primary care doctor after mentioning decreased energy during a routine physical. The doctor had ordered a testosterone test that came back at 318 nanograms per deciliter, technically normal. The doctor prescribed AndroGel anyway, telling the patient it would help him feel more energetic and improve his workouts. No discussion of fertility effects, cardiovascular risks, or secondary transfer occurred. The patient suffered a stroke 18 months later, leaving him with permanent partial paralysis. Another plaintiff, 48 years old, had seen a low-T clinic advertisement and scheduled an appointment. The clinic drew blood, confirmed borderline low testosterone, and prescribed AndroGel the same day. The entire visit lasted 30 minutes, including paperwork. The clinic provided a 1-page information sheet that mentioned possible side effects in small print. The patient developed a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in his lungs, 7 months into treatment. He survived but required blood thinners indefinitely and could no longer work his physically demanding job. Widows testified about husbands who died suddenly from heart attacks while taking testosterone prescribed for minor complaints. A 63-year-old had started AndroGel for fatigue his doctor attributed to low testosterone. His level had been 340, within normal range, but the doctor prescribed anyway. He died of a massive heart attack while gardening 10 months later. The autopsy showed severe coronary disease that may have been accelerated by testosterone therapy. Defense attorneys argued that proving causation was impossible because many plaintiffs had underlying risk factors for cardiovascular disease. They pointed to obesity, hypertension, smoking, and family history as alternative explanations. This defense ignored the epidemiological evidence showing increased event rates in testosterone users after controlling for traditional risk factors. The statistical association suggested testosterone added independent risk beyond what other factors explained. Expert witnesses for plaintiffs included prominent cardiologists and endocrinologists, who testified about biological mechanisms linking testosterone to cardiovascular harm. They explained how increased hematocrit, altered cholesterol, elevated blood pressure, and plaque instability combined to create substantially higher heart attack and stroke risks. Defense experts, many with undisclosed financial ties to pharmaceutical companies, disputed these mechanisms and claimed any associations were coincidental. The first trial occurred in July 2017 in Oregon State Court, outside the federal multi-district litigation. The plaintiff was a 50-year-old man who'd suffered a heart attack after 14 months on AndroGel. The jury heard evidence about internal company documents showing knowledge of cardiovascular risks and deliberate decisions not to warn adequately. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury found for the plaintiff and awarded substantial damages. AbbVie appealed immediately. That verdict sent shockwaves through pharmaceutical company boardrooms. A successful plaintiff verdict meant potentially billions in liability if replicated across thousands of pending cases. AbbVie's stock price dropped on the news. Internal projections calculated exposure could exceed $10 billion if all cardiovascular injury cases went to trial and produced similar outcomes. Settlement became inevitable despite company denials of wrongdoing. Negotiations began in late 2017 between AbbVie and plaintiff attorneys representing the largest blocks of cases. The company wanted global resolution, avoiding thousands of individual trials. Plaintiff lawyers wanted maximum compensation for injured clients plus attorney fees. Neither side wanted to discuss settlement terms publicly, because acknowledging liability would damage AbbVie's position in remaining cases, while plaintiff lawyers didn't want to discourage additional claims. Initial settlement offers were insultingly low, treating heart attacks and strokes like minor inconveniences worth tens of thousands, rather than hundreds of thousands or millions. Plaintiff attorneys rejected these proposals, preparing for trials that would expose more damaging internal documents. AbbVie increased offers, but demanded confidentiality agreements, preventing plaintiffs from discussing settlements or publicizing documents revealed during discovery. Some plaintiffs refused to settle, insisting on their day in court and public exposure of what AbbVie had done. These families wanted accountability beyond monetary compensation. They believed the public deserved to know how a pharmaceutical company had knowingly harmed thousands of men in pursuit of profits. Their cases moved toward trial dates, while others settled under confidential terms. By 2019, AbbVie had paid out over $500 million in testosterone-related settlements, covering approximately 2,000 cardiovascular injury cases. The settlements came with no admission of wrongdoing and gag orders preventing plaintiffs from discussing what they'd learned. This allowed the company to continue marketing testosterone products while claiming it had done nothing wrong. Public perception remained largely uninformed about the scope of corporate malfeasance that litigation had uncovered. Thousands of cases remained pending because victims kept emerging as men realized their heart attacks and strokes might have been caused by testosterone therapy. The statute of limitations in most states ran from when patients discovered, or should have discovered, the connection between their injuries and medication. Many men had never suspected testosterone until learning about litigation, then reviewing their medical histories and recognizing temporal relationships between starting hormone therapy and cardiovascular events. The federal judge overseeing multi-district litigation grew frustrated with AbbVie's tactics of fighting discovery, appealing adverse rulings, and stonewalling settlement discussions. Judicial orders compelled document production and sanctioned the company for discovery violations. These sanctions included adverse inference instructions that juries could consider company document destruction as evidence of consciousness of wrongdoing. Despite massive settlements, AndroGel remained profitable. Annual sales had declined from peak levels, but still exceeded $500 million through 2020. AbbVie's calculation proved correct. Even accounting for litigation costs, testosterone products generated more profit than liability. The business model succeeded financially even if it failed medically and ethically. The testosterone litigation revealed patterns seen in pharmaceutical mass torts across multiple drugs. Companies knowingly marketed dangerous products, concealed risks, manipulated medical literature, and paid out settlements while admitting no fault. The legal system extracted financial penalties but rarely produced meaningful accountability or prevented similar behavior with other drugs. Corporate executives faced no criminal charges. Regulatory agencies imposed modest fines. The pharmaceutical business model remained intact. Some plaintiff attorneys believed AbbVie had hidden its most damaging documents through aggressive use of privilege claims and strategic destruction before litigation began. Document retention policies conveniently resulted in email deletions shortly before subpoenas arrived. Smoking gun evidence of explicit decisions to harm patients for profit probably existed but never surfaced because it had been eliminated or successfully shielded behind attorney-client privilege. The legal reckoning had exposed corporate callousness and regulatory failure, but hadn't stopped the testosterone industry. Lower sales reflected cardiovascular warnings and litigation publicity, not fundamental changes in how these products were marketed and prescribed. The machine still operated, still convinced men they needed hormone therapy, still generated billions in revenue while exposing patients to risks that far exceeded any potential benefits for most users. The lawsuits represented accountability for past harms, but did nothing to prevent future victims from being created by the same system. AndroGel sales in 2023 still exceeded $400 million annually, despite everything that had been revealed about cardiovascular deaths, sterilized fathers, and contaminated children. AbbVie had rebranded its marketing approach, targeting younger demographics through social media influencers and fitness culture rather than traditional medical advertising. Instagram accounts with millions of followers promoted testosterone optimization as essential for peak performance, disguising pharmaceutical promotion as lifestyle advice. The low-T industry had metastasized beyond traditional pharmaceutical channels into a sprawling network of telemedicine clinics, men's health spas, and online prescription services. Companies like Hone Health, Maximus, and Marius offered testosterone therapy through smartphone apps with minimal medical oversight. Men uploaded selfies and answered questionnaires, had brief video consultations with physicians they'd never meet in person, then received prescriptions and medications delivered discreetly to their homes. These digital platforms marketed testosterone as biohacking and performance optimization rather than medical treatment for disease. The messaging appealed to men in their 30s and 40s who viewed hormone therapy as equivalent to taking vitamins or supplements. Terms like TRT for testosterone replacement therapy became fitness industry jargon, divorced from medical context and stripped of warnings about serious risks. Boutique men's health clinics proliferated in affluent neighborhoods, offering testosterone therapy alongside vitamin infusions, peptides, and other age-defying treatments. These facilities operated in regulatory grey zones, technically legal but ethically questionable in their liberal prescribing standards. A man could walk in complaining of fatigue, get blood drawn, and leave an hour later with testosterone prescription in hand. The business model depended on high patient volume and minimal gatekeeping. Compounding pharmacies entered the market, creating custom testosterone formulations at lower prices than brand-name products. These medications bypassed FDA review because compounded drugs weren't technically subject to the same approval requirements. Quality control varied wildly between pharmacies. Some provided reliable products while others delivered inconsistent doses or contaminated preparations. Patients had no way to assess quality, trusting that regulated pharmacies wouldn't harm them. The fitness influencer economy accelerated testosterone normalization among men who'd never considered hormone therapy in previous decades. Bodybuilders and personal trainers openly discussed their TRT protocols on YouTube, framing it as responsible health optimization rather than performance-enhancing drug use. Millions of young men absorbed these messages, viewing testosterone therapy as a natural progression in their fitness journeys, rather than medical intervention with serious consequences. Podcast interviews with longevity doctors and anti-aging specialists promoted testosterone as essential for maintaining vitality past age 40. These conversations rarely mentioned fertility destruction, cardiovascular risks, or secondary transfer to children. Instead, they emphasized improved energy, enhanced libido, and better body composition. The format allowed extended discussion that normalized hormone therapy, while avoiding the balanced risk-benefit analysis required in medical settings. Reddit forums dedicated to testosterone replacement accumulated hundreds of thousands of members sharing experiences, comparing protocols, and encouraging each other to start therapy. The communities developed their own expertise divorced from medical consensus, with users advising each other on dosing, managing side effects, and finding prescribers willing to write prescriptions. Misinformation flourished alongside genuine experience, creating echo chambers where risks were minimized and benefits exaggerated. secondary exposure warnings remained buried in package inserts that almost nobody read. The FDA's 2015 requirements for enhanced warnings about skin-to-skin transfer had minimal real-world impact. Doctors rarely discussed the issue during appointments. Pharmacists didn't counsel patients about protecting their families. Men applied testosterone gel, then hugged their children, slept beside their wives, and went about daily activities without understanding they were dosing everyone they touched. New cases of childhood virilization from secondary exposure continued appearing in medical literature through 2020 and beyond. A 3-year-old boy in Nevada developed pubic hair and enlarged genitals traced to his grandfather's testosterone gel during weekly visits. Twin girls in Michigan showed signs of premature puberty linked to their father's daily AndroGel application. These cases represented the tip of an iceberg because most secondary exposures produce subtle effects that went unrecognized or unreported. Research published in 2021 found detectable testosterone residue on household surfaces in homes where men use topical gel. Kitchen counters, bathroom sinks, door handles, and remote controls all tested positive for hormone contamination. Children touch these surfaces constantly, accumulating exposure through routes nobody had anticipated. The gel designed for convenient home use had turned entire houses into low-level hormone delivery systems, affecting everyone who lived there. Female partners continued experiencing masculinization symptoms that doctors failed to connect with household testosterone use. Women developed increased facial hair, requiring laser removal and electrolysis costing thousands of dollars. Voice changes persisted even after exposure ended in some cases, permanently altering speech patterns. These women became collateral damage in their partner's pursuit of enhanced vitality, suffering health consequences without having chosen testosterone therapy themselves. The fertility catastrophe expanded as the cohort of men who'd started testosterone in their 30s reached ages when they seriously attempted to have children. Reproductive endocrinology clinics saw steady streams of couples facing infertility, traced directly to years of testosterone therapy. Many had been prescribed the hormone by doctors who never mentioned fertility consequences or dismissed concerns, with assurances that effects were reversible. Recovery rates from testosterone-induced infertility proved worse than initial optimistic predictions. Studies following men for 5 years after stopping testosterone found that 40% never regained sperm counts adequate for natural conception. Testicular atrophy that occurred during treatment sometimes proved permanent, with shrunken testicles unable to resume normal function even with medical intervention. These men faced lifetime infertility from medication they'd taken for minor complaints. The market for male fertility preservation expanded in response to testosterone's effects. Sperm banking services marketed specifically to men about to start TRT, allowing them to freeze samples before treatment destroyed their fertility. This solution worked only for men who anticipated the problem before starting therapy. Those who'd already been on testosterone for months or years had nothing to preserve because their sperm production had already ceased. Assisted reproductive technology became increasingly necessary for couples where male partners had used testosterone. IVF with intracytoplasmic sperm injection allowed some couples to achieve pregnancy using the few sperm cells that could be recovered. Success rates remained lower than standard IVF, and costs routinely exceeded $30,000 per attempt. Insurance coverage for fertility treatments varied widely, leaving many couples unable to afford medical solutions to medication-induced infertility. Support groups for testosterone-harmed patients formed online and in major cities, providing spaces for men to share experiences of cardiovascular events, permanent infertility, and families damaged by secondary exposure. These groups documented hundreds of cases where physicians had prescribed testosterone inappropriately, without adequate informed consent. Members described feeling betrayed by doctors they trusted and angry at pharmaceutical companies that had prioritized profits over patient safety. Class action lawsuits continued into the 2020s as new plaintiffs emerged with cardiovascular injuries and fertility damage. The litigation had become routine, with established procedures for handling claims and settlement values. AbbVie and other manufacturers factored ongoing legal costs into business plans, treating settlements as predictable expenses rather than deterrents. The liability never exceeded profits, ensuring testosterone remained financially attractive despite known harms. Regulatory agencies had failed comprehensively to protect public health from inappropriate testosterone prescribing. The FDA's approval was based on short-term studies in genuinely hypergonadal men, yet the agency never meaningfully restricted off-label use in healthy men with age-related decline. Warning labels, updated multiple times, proved ineffective because prescribers ignored them and patients never saw them. The regulatory system designed to ensure drug safety had been overwhelmed by pharmaceutical marketing power. Medical education about testosterone therapy remained inadequate in most training programs. Physicians completing residencies in internal medicine or family practice received minimal instruction about appropriate patient selection, risks of fertility loss, secondary exposure prevention, or cardiovascular monitoring. These doctors then entered practice and prescribed testosterone based on pharmaceutical company information and patient demand rather than solid medical foundation. The normalization of testosterone therapy in popular culture reached absurd extremes by 2024. Celebrities openly discussed their hormone optimization protocols in interviews. Professional athletes, after retiring, admitted to TRT use that had enhanced their late career performance. Health and wellness brands partnered with testosterone manufacturers to promote male hormone health as essential to modern masculinity. The cultural messaging overwhelmed medical caution. Public health consequences of mass testosterone prescribing would take decades to fully manifest. The generation of men who'd started TRT in their 30s and 40s would eventually age into high cardiovascular risk years, potentially accelerated by years of hormone therapy. Their children exposed to secondary transfer might experience developmental effects not apparent until puberty or beyond. The experiment was ongoing with millions of unwitting participants. Research published in 2023 found associations between paternal testosterone use and behavioral problems in children that couldn't be explained by genetic factors alone. The suggestion that secondary exposure might affect neurodevelopment remained controversial and required further study. But the possibility that testosterone gel had harmed children's brains in addition to their bodies represented a nightmare scenario nobody wanted to fully investigate. The fundamental lesson of the AndroGel catastrophe was that pharmaceutical marketing could overwhelm medical judgment and regulatory oversight when profits were large enough. A medication with legitimate uses for serious disease had been transformed into a lifestyle product through aggressive advertising that medicalized normal aging. Millions of men had received unnecessary therapy, tens of thousands had suffered serious harm, and the industry had prospered while leaving destruction in its wake. The low-T epidemic represented regulatory capture, where industries control the agencies meant to regulate them through funding, lobbying, and revolving door employment. The FDA officials who'd approved testosterone products later took consulting positions with pharmaceutical companies. Medical society guidelines were written by physicians with extensive industry financial ties. The system was corrupted at every level, producing predictable results favoring corporate profits over patient welfare. In 2026, testosterone therapy continues expanding despite 2 decades of evidence documenting serious harms. The products have evolved slightly, with newer formulations and delivery methods, but the fundamental pharmacology remains unchanged. External testosterone still shuts down natural production, still destroys fertility, still increases cardiovascular risk, still transfers to family members. The harms are baked into the medication itself, not flaws that can be engineered away. Men currently starting testosterone therapy repeat mistakes of millions who preceded them. They trust doctors who underestimate risks, believe marketing that overstates benefits, and fail to appreciate that pharmaceutical companies view them as revenue sources rather than patients deserving protection. The cycle perpetuates because the incentives driving it remain unchanged. Prescribing testosterone generates income for doctors, profits for manufacturers, and fees for pharmacies. Patient welfare matters only when it affects the bottom line. The AndroGel story demonstrates how modern medicine can systematically harm patients while claiming to help them. A gel applied to skin created generations of infertile fathers who'd wanted only to feel more energetic. It dosed children with powerful hormones through innocent hugs and bedtime cuddles. It triggered heart attacks and strokes in men seeking vitality. And through all the documented harm, the industry continued operating profitably, protected by regulatory capture and cultural normalization of dangerous practices. The men who started testosterone therapy because pharmaceutical companies convinced them they had low T will spend years discovering consequences. Some already know they're infertile, that recovery isn't happening, that the families they wanted won't exist. Others have survived heart attacks and strokes wondering if their medication caused them. Children are growing up with effects from exposures their parents never intended. Development altered by hormones meant for aging men. The future holds more victims because nothing has fundamentally changed. Testosterone remains available through increasingly accessible channels with decreasing medical oversight. The fitness culture that promotes hormone optimization continues expanding. Young men view TRT as normal, even essential, for achieving their physical potential. The medical establishment that should protect them instead facilitates harm through prescription pads and consultation fees. AndroGel and its competitors generated over $50 billion in cumulative revenue since 2000. That money came from convincing millions of men they were sick when they were healthy, then selling them medicine that made many of them genuinely sick. The transaction enriched pharmaceutical executives, shareholders, prescribing physicians, and everyone involved in the testosterone supply chain. It impoverished patients through lost health, destroyed fertility, damaged families, and medical bills for treating complications. The story that began with bull testicles in a Dutch laboratory has become a modern pharmaceutical horror story. Testosterone, that elegant 19-carbon molecule controlling masculinity, became weaponized by an industry that saw profit potential in mass medicalization. The gel that promised restored vitality delivered sterilization, cardiovascular death, and contaminated children instead. An entire generation of fathers learned too late that the medication meant to enhance their masculinity had systematically destroyed it in the most fundamental ways biology could devise.